Some trees in the Pacific Northwest rose higher than city skyscrapers, their trunks wider than trucks, and centuries old before any settler arrived. Each one could crush men, animals, even entire crews. But America's hunger for rails and lumber would not be stopped by danger or age. If you think felling these giants by hand was even possible, subscribe now, because behind every fallen titan, there's a story that defies belief. Douglas firs, western red cedars, and Sitka spruces once towered 250 to 300 feet above the mist, their trunks stretching 10 to 15 feet across at the base. Some had already stood for 1,000 years when the first settlers arrived, their thick bark scarred by centuries of storms and fire. The lowest branches often began more than 60 feet above the ground, leaving the forest floor in permanent shadow. Roots flared outward like the walls of a wooden fortress, making even the idea of cutting at ground level impossible. Each tree was a living monument, older than cities, heavier than ships, and too large for a single glance to take in. Railroads stretched across the continent, hungry for timber at every mile. Each mile of track demanded about 3,000 wooden ties. Thousands of miles multiplied that need into millions. Engineers called for massive beams to hold up bridges and trestles, while mining companies ordered thick timbers to brace tunnels deep underground. Coastal cities needed lumber for docks, warehouses, and homes, drawing on the forests without pause. From camp to river, from river to rail, every log moved through a chain built on raw necessity. The appetite for wood was constant, and nothing in the forest was spared to feed it. June 1889. Flames swept through downtown Seattle, devouring more than 100 acres in a single day. Where wooden buildings and wharves once stood, only ash and twisted metal remained. As the embers cooled, the city's sawmills roared to life. Yesler's and Stimson and Post ran without pause, shipping out millions of board feet to rebuild streets, warehouses, and homes. Orders poured in from city blocks wiped clean, and the appetite for old-growth timber became insatiable. San Francisco, Tacoma, and Portland faced their own disasters, each one fueling a faster harvest. Urban catastrophe turned the ancient forests into a raw material pipeline, and the mills became the beating heart of recovery. The Misery Whip was the logger's answer to the impossible scale of the forest. Crosscut saws stretched 6, 10, even 12 feet from handle to handle. Steel blades bristled with teeth and rakers, built for two men working in perfect rhythm. Each pull cut only on the return, forcing Jack and Eli to match pace, breadth, and strength. The blade weighed several pounds for every foot, and resin from the wounded tree glued sawdust deep in the kerf, demanding constant clearing. Hands blistered, shoulders burned, and the punishment never let up. Forcing the saw only risked a buckled blade and wasted energy. Even the best teams brought down just 2 or 3 giants in a day. Jack and Eli stood 8 feet above the ground, each balanced on a springboard wedged into a hand-chopped notch. The planks flexed with every shift of weight, but the metal shoes bit into living wood and held steady. Cutting above the swollen base meant the saw could follow straight grain, not twisted buttress. Every movement was a test. One soft pocket or rotten seam could send a man crashing down. The risk was constant, and the pay reflected it. Fallers earned up to 50% more than other camp workers. Not for brute strength, but for judgment under pressure and the nerve to trust a board that never stopped moving. In 1914, a crew set to work on a 260-foot western red cedar near Gray's Harbor. The saw bit deep, springboards flexed, and the tree began to lean. Without warning, the trunk split straight up the back, a barber chair. The massive butt exploded backward, snapping the springboard and pinning one of the fallers beneath thousands of pounds of wood. The camp ledger recorded it with a single line. Barber chair, fatal. This was the price of a mistake. No warning, no escape. just a name lost to the forest. If you want more stories that history forgot but never stopped costing lives, subscribe. Now. Logging camps sat deep in the woods, far from any road, with bunkhouses crowded by 30 or 50 men at a time. Straw mattresses lined the bunks, and the air was thick with damp wool and tobacco smoke. Crews spoke in Norwegian, Italian, English, and Chinook jargon, sharing stories and aches over beans and flapjacks. Days stretched 10 to 12 hours, 6 or even 7 days a week. The camp ledger kept its own language, just names, dates, and single-line fates. Injuries and deaths were noted in passing. The risks folded into routine. Few fallers lasted long enough to grow old among the trees. In 1929, the first gasoline chainsaw weighed nearly 200 pounds, yet it cut, felling time from hours to minutes. Modern harvesters now do the work of entire crews, but less than 10% of those ancient forests remain. Subscribe to keep these stories standing when the forests no longer do. Less than 10% of America's original old growth stands today. Every lost tree held centuries of life and labor. What remains now is ours to choose, preserve or let vanish. Subscribe for more untold history.